morning. All right, there you can hear me better. So, we've been studying the SQ21, and I am going to talk about quadrant 2, but I'm not going to use the SQ21 book because I know you're studying that, and that way you don't hear the same thing twice. We're just going to take another perspective. Last time I was here, we talked about the individual evolutions, and today we're going to broaden that out a little bit. We're still going to use a little bit of Robert Berman's book, Birthing Greater Reality, which is my main resource last time. But we live in an abundant universe, right? And when I started working on this talk, I started out with one book. You know how us thought people are. We start out with one, and then this other one pops into our head, and it's like, but that would fit in so well. You know, it's got some really great things in there. And then another one popped into my head, so I tried to distill it down so we're not talking until next Sunday. So the title of my talk is Everything I Needed to Know I Learned from Trees. Okay? And I came up with that title when I came across an Old Bailey word. I like to save them because every once in a while one will pop up that I'm just drawn to. So this one was actually from April of 2016. And you know, at the beginning of 1 month or in between the 2 months, there's always a little story written by someone. And there was a story in there written by Greg Barrett, and the title of it was Strength from a Redwood Forest. So he was talking about a time when he and James Dillard Freeman went to the coast, to California. And James said that there were two things he really wanted to see. One was the ocean, and one was an old grove of redwood trees. And why First Grove? What makes it so special? Well, there's one thing about redwood trees. You know, when we look at them, they look so magnificent and so strong. They even have one that's big enough that they actually cut through and you can drive through it. Bruce and I were there on vacation one time. But you know, they're not standing alone. Their roots are pretty close to the surface. And it is by the intertwining of their roots that they're able to stand upright. So when you look at that individual tree, you're not seeing just that tree, you're looking at a community. So Freeman said that there's something different about the first growth trees, that there's an energy that he could feel. And that redwoods are like us. They find their strength in community. So they visited the nearest first growth stand of trees. And he invited Greg to just pause and feel the vibration of the trees. For those of you who are tree huggers like me and you're out in the forest, if you just pause and take a breath, you can listen to the trees whispering to each other and you can feel their vibration and their energy. And so they did that amongst those ancient trees. Some of those trees were more than 1,000 years old. In community, they lived longer, something that we could learn. He said, it reminds me of silent unity, strength in numbers. By ourselves, we may not seem to have much, but together, we support each other in staying upright. So, in community, what does it mean to you to be in community? Any thoughts on that?
Have someone to talk to.
Someone to talk to? Right here? This, all right, with like-minded people?
Good energy.
Energy?
Good energy.
Good energy.
Common goal.
A common goal? All right. Well, let's look at that a little bit, and as we do, you can, for those of you who can see it, if you can't, that's all right, I'm going to mention them a couple of times, even though I'm not using that book, about what's going on in that second quadrant. Because we're moving from that place of individual evolution into the evolution of that community. So we talked about the evolution as individuals and the important part that our egos play there. And the egos are important in our human experience. We just don't want them in the driver's seat. That was kind of the conclusion that we came to, right? So they're important but not in the driver's seat. So today we're going to explore the idea of our evolution as a part of the whole. Or as Alan Cohen put it, once we awaken, we are no longer living the life of the ego. We are living for the whole cosmos. That sounds pretty good. Living for the whole cosmos. We become the evolutionary impulse itself. So we are pulled into and become part of that evolution. So in Mark Nepo's book, which was one of those books that came off, and the title of it is More Together Than Alone. Discover the power and spirit of community in our lives and in the world. And he takes us on a journey of what it means to be in community with his own thoughts as well as sharing a lot of thoughts of other people. But it comes back to that awareness of that interconnectedness of all life. Just like, when you look at the redwood trees, there is that interconnectedness in that community of trees. But there's also that interconnectedness in our lives as well. So we cannot live for ourselves alone. Our lives are connected by 1,000 invisible threads. And along these sympathetic fibers, our actions run as causes and return to us as results. And that's from Herman Melville. There's different movies that show us that. One of the ones that come to mind first is Miracle on 54th Street or 34th Street. We were trying to remember what street was on the way up here, and we had a lot of numbers, but we didn't hit on that one.
It's Herald Square.
34th Street. And so he got to see what it would have been like had he never been there. What people's lives would have been like had he not been born or not been part of that community. There's one playing right now that Bruce and our daughter went to see yesterday called Yesterday. They saw it yesterday, and the title of it was Yesterday. And it is, what if the Beatles hadn't happened? And it ended up, I got the even smaller than the trailer piece of it. My daughter just gave me a couple of sentences when they got back and telling me how great it was. And that is that, so John Lennon, all these years later, alive and happy that the Beatles hadn't happened. But then, what about the world that we live in and looking at the impact on music and culture that the Beatles had? So just pause for a minute and think of your own life. How has your life impacted our world? Not only by your own actions, but the ripple of that. For those of you who are parents, those children would not be here if you weren't. And how have those children affected people's lives? It's all interconnected. There's no isolation in our world. So we can look at how we decide to be in that world, to be in that place and part of that evolution. How do we model and what do we imitate from generation to generation? Because that community isn't the community of just today. That community is from everything that has happened before us and everything that is going to follow after us. So how do we learn to animate our gifts so that we can feed each other? Every society begins anew while extending the lineage of community throughout the ages. And when you came up to do the prayer, you said, I want to be heard. We all have that yearning to be heard, to be seen and to be heard and respected. So how do we do that in our communities? How do we show up for each other And how do we show up for ourselves? Back to the trees again. You know, above ground, the aspens are very similar to the redwood trees. They too are part of a community. They look as individual trees, just like we all look like we're individuals, knowing we're part of that one presence and that one power. There is only oneness. And when we look at the aspen trees, below the ground they're enlivened by that interconnected set of roots. That means that they're one living organism. They're not just individual trees, but they're a living organism and one living community. There's in the Fish Lake National Forest in Utah, there's an aspen grove named Pando, and that is Latin for a spread. It's considered one of the largest aspen groves in the world, and it contains about 47,000 aspen trees. It's a large community. And it's estimated to be about 80,000 years old. 80,000 years old. And it goes back to that again. Shared roots live longer, a lesson for us all when we look out. So when we can accept that all humans share the same invisible root system, that we too can rush nutrients to others who are damaged. Because we're talking about if one tree is cut down or for some reason dies, that it takes the nutrients from that tree to send out and to nourish other trees as part of that community system. And I think as human beings, we're pretty good at doing that during disaster. You know, when the hurricane hit, people weren't saying, well, let's see, what's your political beliefs? Do I want to let you into my boat? What's your religious belief? Are you like-minded like me? Who should I say? Who should I let into my boat? And now, we really get that interconnectedness of all life. It doesn't matter. It didn't matter what someone's sexual orientation was or their belief systems. It was if someone needed a boat ride to safety, then a hand was given and that person was helped. And that's what true community is about. It doesn't matter if we believe the same, if we look the same. And how do we take that from times of disaster and put it into our everyday lives? That's the challenge for us. You know, the African view is Ubuntu, and I may pronounce it wrong. But the idea of that is, it's translated, I am because you are. You are because I am. And what that does is it implies that we find our humanity in each other. Archbishop Desmond Tutu says that Ubuntu is the essence of being human. I am because you are. You are because I am. My humanity is caught up in your humanity. So, we're each individual expressions, just like those trees. And they may have a different number of branches, maybe just a little variation in shade of color or whatever, but they're still part of that aspen community or that redwood community. And it's the same with us. We may be a little bit different, but we're still part of that community. And actually, I don't know about you, but I think if we were all exactly the same, it might get a little boring. You know, I would get really tired of everywhere I look. It'd be like going into one of those fun houses with all those mirrors, and everywhere you look, you see yourself over and over and over again. Yeah, for me, that would be boring. So it's important that we understand and being able to live in this world and be part of that evolution, that we know that not everybody has the same worldview that we do. To understand that there is a difference in worldview, but there is no they. That we and they, We are the they. It's a little hard to say. We are the they. There is no separation. So oftentimes when we're talking with someone, especially if it's someone who has different opinions than we do, we're just looking to confirm what we know. And when we step out of that place of what I know and really listen to somebody because I want to hear what they have to say, and I create this open space for them to express who they are, then it creates a space for relationships. It creates a space for those connections. And we can engage others and we can meet soul to soul instead of that ego to ego that we talked about last time. You know, history proves that we oppress each other when we have our lists of shoulds. I don't know if you've ever had a list of shoulds. I did, and every once in a while it'll crop up. Mainly it's about me. Sometimes it's about other people, like they shouldn't cut in front of me like that, or they shouldn't do this or that. But then I kind of go back to that one time I heard in a workshop that I went to not should on ourselves. I think it's important not to should on other people as well. So what if it comes down to that the healing of the human life is actually just those little kindnesses that we do on a regular basis. That little kindness that we do not because it's this huge emergency like the hurricanes or tornadoes, but because it's another human being. Or it might be an animal, or it might be taking care of our earth in some way. But that kindness, because there is no separation. Wayne Mueller put it more articulately than I did. What if the healing of the world utterly depends on the 10,000 invisible kindnesses that we offer simply and quietly throughout the pilgrimage of each human life? And each of you, I know, do little kindnesses every day. And sometimes we do them without even thinking. So I invite you to be intentional about it. As you go about your life, being aware of when you do those little kindnesses and intentionally plan for them as well. So the unplanned and the planned. Okay. Martin Luther King referred to it as the beloved community. We're all part of that same community, that beloved community. All right. So the next one I want to talk about just a little bit is that breadth of time perception. You know, I said that it's not just what's happening today in the present, but everything that happened before us and everything that will come after us. The Iroquois had a tradition of making decisions based on how it is going to affect the next 7 generations. What a way to make decisions. Not just what it's going to happen this week or this day or this year even, but 7 generations. I think some choices that have been made might have been a little bit different had they been made in that light. You know, we must conceive of ourselves, the Dalai Lama puts it this way, we must conceive of ourselves as part of one community. We must support that one humanity through our own spiritually based community, like this, and not put our own community ahead of that one humanity. If we want a better world for our grandchildren, not our children, but our grandchildren, we must act now. We can't continue to just regret. And I thought this was really interesting because he said change will come not from meditation, but from education. A sense of wholeness is a necessity. We must move from I to we. The Dalai Lama. So, you know, we don't know always what somebody else is seeing. I heard somebody put it this way. We may be in the same room, but we're not watching the same movie. So there's a story about a grandma and a grandchild in Hawaii. And the grandma thought that she'd take this grandchild out And it's a rural area. When I think of Hawaii, I think of beaches and cities, and obviously I haven't been to Hawaii yet. But they went out, and she was walking along in this rural area and pointing out the horses and the different animals, and thinking the child would get really excited and clap their hands like little kids do and smile, and the child just kind of walked along, okay. And finally, she did this every day, kind of made this loop. Finally, on the third day, she got down on her knees so that she was about eye level with the child to see what the child was seeing. Do you think the child was seeing the horses and all that stuff that she liked? No. All the child was seeing was tall grass. So she put the child on her shoulders and walked around pointing out the animals, and the child did get excited and did clap its hands. But we don't know unless we are on the same eye level, unless we are looking through their eyes, or at least listening enough to get an idea of what their eyes are seeing. We had a convention in June, Unity's People's Convention, and it was One Humanity, Many Stories. One of the workshops I went to had people sharing their stories, people from different cultures and what it was like for them. Like being a gay Hispanic person, what was that like for him growing up? And just different experiences that different people have within our community growing up. And naive as I was, I thought I understood, and I found out listening to them, I had no idea. So really listening to other people's stories, which is that power or limitation or power of our human perception. We really don't know. Then next is that awareness of spiritual life. I think it is interesting. I've always been interested in world religions and different faith traditions. And in our home church, we had a series where each month we had someone from a different faith tradition speak one Sunday out of the month. And in the differences, there's always that kernel that is the same. And when I listen to them, it's like we're more alike than we are different. So what are some of those spiritual lives? There was an archaeologist with an Aborigine in Australia, and they went into a cave, and there were ancient paintings along the wall, and some of them were starting to disintegrate a little bit, and the Aborigine begins to touch it up. Now, for some of us, that would be like heritage. I mean, not heritage, but sacrilege. Yes, sacrilege or heresy. And the Aborigine repeats wrong that it is not he alone who is painting, but that which moves through us all. So for them to keep that vision from way back then, he's not the one that's doing it, but that which moved through the person originally is the same that is moving through him to keep it going. So again, the spiritual laws, but also from way back then all the way up to the present and going forward. So through that many paths, we have that discernment of relationship that takes us through ourselves and beyond ourselves into the interdependent mystery. I kind of like it. We don't know the answers. It really is a mystery. And we find ourselves in each and every living thing, whereas the Hindus say, thou art that. And that's one of those that we hear repeated often in many different faith traditions. So all life forms are deeply connected. So what we do to others, we do to ourselves. And in the Christian tradition, it's when Jesus said, what you do to the least of these, you do to me. Because we are all one. We cannot disenfranchise some people without it affecting who we are as a community, as a human. So that brings us into that sense of transcendence. In birthing a greater reality, As we delve deeper into our own individuality, we become more aware of that interconnectedness. Mark Nepo says, I implore you to stay devoted to the proposition that when filled with love, we can work as angels here on earth, using our caring hands as means in our community. You know, it's interesting if you take two living heart cells and you put them close together, two heart cells from two different people, and place them in a petri dish, that over time, together, they will find a third beat. So it's not that one goes with the beat of the other, but together they find a third beat. We could say that this is the genetic basis for our impulse towards community. It's part of our DNA. And when people meditate together, their brain waves quickly harmonize. And when a newcomer joins the group, the newcomer's brain waves harmonize with that of the group. It suggests that intimacy is a catalyst for the experience of oneness. All of this implies that there is a unified field of presence very near to each of us that ranges from atoms to cells to soul. So we began with birthing a greater reality, and today I want to end with that, with this quote. We will become even more of a unique individual and simultaneously more united as a human community. As we go deeper into our own nature, we discover that we are united with all things. So as we affirm often, there is only one presence and one power, and we are united.